Yeah, appreciate it, Derek, and thanks for hearing my story.
I appreciate your work as well, Jamie. And your ominous entry. I love the simplicity of this experience. No over-the-top build-up, just a turn and boom. Full-body apparition. And don't let the fact that what Jamie saw looked quite similar to previous reports in that area slip by us. I think that's a pretty important mention right there. So thank you again, Jamie. That's one I'll be thinking about next time I'm parked to some cars in a parking lot late at night. Like I said, I have a heaping pile of entries to shovel through here. So not all calls will have in-depth analysis. Let's call this rapid fire. No pun intended. The next in the chamber is a killer of a story, by way of the state of Texas. Please welcome Rob to the program.
Hey Derek, this is Rob Gonzalez from Brownsville, Texas. I got a great military story for you. It's a secondhand story because it didn't happen to me. It happened to a guy I used to work with, but it's still a really good one. So some years back, I think it's probably like 15 years by the time now, but he used to actually be a military serviceman in Mexico. His unit was actually a special unit that covered narcos, kind of drug lords and stuff, in the Mexico area. So what happened was his unit got a tip that there was a drug lord kind of hiding out in some certain mountain area. I'm not really sure where, but so since it wasn't really, 100% verified, he wasn't, sure if it was a real tip or not. They only sent a couple of guys out there. I think it was actually 3 at the time. So they go out to the mountains. They're looking around. I think they spent like 2 or 3 days out there. They couldn't find anything. And finally, on the 4th day, they kind of come across like a little shanty, like a little just shack out there in the middle of nowhere. So they knock on the door. An old lady answers. It's just her and her husband. They look around the house, empty. There's nobody there. They kind of walk around the perimeter, nothing. So, they move on, go about their business. They go a couple hundred yards after that, and it's getting kind of late, so they decide to sleep there in a field. It's almost like a cornfield. So they go to bed for the night. It's him and the 2 other guys. He said he was suddenly woken up in the middle of the night by like the sensation that he was being dragged by his feet. He said his head was knocking, he felt something pulling on his leg. And so he grabbed his gun, he cocked it, he opened his eyes, and when he opened his eyes, he just suddenly stopped. He was just there in the middle of the field. He kind of looked around, he didn't see nothing. He heard a scream, maybe 40, 50 yards away. He looked up and he saw one of his, I guess you can call him friend, I guess. He was getting dragged into the timber line. There was some trees. He got dragged out. He got up. He started chasing him. The guy that was also with him was still a couple yards behind. I guess he didn't get dragged or anything like that. So they got up. They both started running. They never found the guy. They called in for some reinforcements. I think it took like a day or 2 for the reinforcements to get there. They kind of looked around the area. They never found nothing. The guy just was gone. They went back to the shanty, and the people, the husband and the wife, the old lady, they were just gone. Like there was nothing there. It seemed like no one had been there for years. So I really don't know if you want to call this paranormal, maybe witch, something like that. But I thought it was a really good story. I don't know if in the context it really, fills out your military story or not. But there you go. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. This story is wild. Now, I'll admit, it's tough to get a beat on this one. I mean, what exactly are we dealing with here? Aliens? A ghost? A wild man? Or perhaps, as Rob suggested, a witch? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll leave you with yet another suggestion that I bet a handful of you never thought of. Glimmer Man. So thanks again, Rob. I'd love to hear from anyone else that has heard or experienced something similar, especially in that same region of the world. Now up next, we hear an entry from Jesse from Parts Unknown.
This is Jesse, pod for the military show. First off, I was just listening to the podcast where Billy went from Arkansas, saw the dragons in the telescope. I just got done listening to a story about that girl saw 3 dragons in the sky, get into a flying saucer. I thought it was kind of crazy, but it's interesting that somebody else is seeing the same thing. Kind of makes you think. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was in the Marine Corps for 12 years, and back in 2004, I did a stint at this fuel laboratory where they'd offload fuel, and we'd do dispatch for trucks and a lot of different stuff. But when you come into the office, it was picture two squares with a rectangle connecting the two offices. And there's a plexiglass door as soon as you walk in, and to your right, with the plexiglass window of the door. And you would see a shadowy figure there. And so when I first get there, people tell me it's haunted, and I'm like, okay, don't know what to think. But every now and then you'd be talking to somebody out of the corner of your eye, you see somebody standing there, and you go look over, and they kind of float away. And a few times in there by myself, I'd kind of see something, and you go open the door, and nobody's there. People would come in and be like, who's that back there? Kind of look, white in the face, and people would see it. So it was kind of interesting. Later on, we were unloading a couple million gallons of fuel. So I'm sitting there by myself, and I'm playing the game Doom 3 when it first came out. Lights off, spooking myself out. And sometime during the night, I felt a hand to grab my shoulder. I shoot up and run out. Had to use the walkie-talkie outside for a bit, and kind of pretty spooky. But hope you can use it. But thank you. Keep up the good work. Bye.
Thanks, Jesse. Was Jesse touched by the other side? Or did he simply have doom on the mind and an overactive imagination? And what the hell is with these dragons? This is the third mention for those keeping score. Thank you again, Jesse, for sharing your entry. Now, our next story was submitted by someone we'll call Joe.
Hi, Derek. I hope you don't mind me not using my actual name or stating my actual place of living state. You can call me Joe. So this happened in late September of 2018. I'm in the National Guard, and I was during that time training at Fort Benning, Georgia. I was in the initial entry time period we call reception, which is when you receive uniforms and get medical checkups and stuff like that. I was there for a month, which is kind of irregular. It's usually only supposed to take like 7 days or somewhere in that ballpark, but someone messed up paperwork allegedly, and like me and I want to say like 200 other dudes got held up. Anyhow, so I was there for a month, and for those who have gone to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training in AIT and anything like that, my armor, cavalry, and infantry friends and such, this building that you stay in is called 30th AG, or that entire part of the base, which is where like all the checkups and stuff happens. And I guess you could say the living quarters there, the barracks, they were just really, really densely packed with negative energy, I think you could probably say. Now, it's probably due to the fact that there are so many suicides that take place like every year there. I know just before I showed up, this is mildly graphic and I apologize, but one guy couldn't take it anymore and he jumped off of the building, the barracks, and shattered both of his legs and was taken to a hospital where he went on to drink bleach and afterwards died. Due to all this, there have been a lot of rumors and such about how haunted the building is. I'd like to basically affirm that that's basically true. I was on a fire guard shift one night, probably around midnight or 1 a.m. And for those of you who don't know, fire guard is like different people, like maybe 1 or 2 dudes will wake up at a certain hour of the night to like clean and stuff like that. Me and my buddy were on a fire guard shift, and just the weirdest stuff was happening. Showers turning on and off, and I don't mean like they were just like leaking or anything like that. Like you had to like fully activate them. You had to like pull the thing out, the handle or whatever, and then turn it to whatever pressure or temperature or whatever that you desired. About 20 of these things just went on all at once at that one night. And same thing would happen with the sinks and stuff like that every other night. Yeah, there's just a lot of weird stuff, man. I mean, it was crazy. Saw some shadows, nonsense like that, like 7-foot tall masses of shadow, roughly in the shape of men. I'm not much of a believer in that kind of stuff. I'm more of a skeptic, but after that experience, a bit more willing to accept some of these stories that you show on the podcast. Yeah, love the show. I've only been listening it to for a couple days at this point, but yeah, keep up the good work, man. Have a good night.
I appreciate it, Joe. I can only imagine the negative energy that can accumulate in a place like that. If it works this way, I could see how that negativity could attract some of the dark nasties that Joe had mentioned. Thanks again, Joe, for sharing. We sure appreciate the entry. So now that this military episode is halfway in the books, it's time to start focusing on the Season 9 finale in the next installment of Hometown Legends. Remember, Hometown Legends can be a lot of things. Haunted woods, lost treasure, mysterious strangers, famous UFO sightings. If it's strange and unusual, and it happened in your town, I want to hear about it. So again, that hotline is 1-888-608-NIGHT. And please don't forget to say the words Hometown Legends early in the call. I searched the transcription for the keywords, so that's pretty important. Our next submission comes via an assist. The following is Amy's entry from Idaho.
Hi, my name's Amy, and I work at the Boise, Idaho Veterans Hospital. This is, I guess, a story about military, which is what my wife said you were looking for. I was at work one night. I'm a nursing manager at night on hospital, and part of my job is rounding on all the units and making sure they're doing okay and they have what they need. I've worked at the Veterans Hospital for quite some time, and I've always heard stories of ghosts being seen. I'd never personally, until this night, seen one. I was going from the third floor back down to my office on the first floor. And when you get in the elevator, you usually, because of the lead in the walls, because of the x-ray department, you can't hear too much. And I could loudly hear singing. And I thought, well, that's really odd because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Why would somebody be singing so loud? So the elevator opened on the first floor, and I could hear that the singing was coming from the clinic area, which is closed at this time of day. And occasionally we'll have a homeless person get into the building. And so usually another part of my job is to kick them out. So I'm like, oh, I have to go find one. And as I turned towards the clinic, I saw an apparition of a Navy man in full white, but you could see through him, and he had a mop in his hand, and he was singing as he mopped. And he turned and looked at me, and I saw him, and I just said, carry on. And I turned around and booked it back to my office. When I got back to my office, I told my secretary, I said, oh my gosh, I just saw a ghost. And our security guard happened to be standing there, and I relayed what I saw. And he goes, I've seen that guy too. He's over by the canteen and the clinic areas. And I said, yeah, that's where I saw him. And so I'm not the only one that has actually seen this particular ghost in the building. Anyway, my wife and I really enjoy the podcast and hope this helps.
Thank you, Amy. 13 entries, and surprisingly, this is the only one from a military hospital. I would have guessed I would have received quite a few from that setting. Now, this might be a slight exaggeration, but I swear, every veteran hospital that I'm aware of seems to have its own haunting. So thanks again, Amy. And a big thanks to your wife for encouraging you to share your tale. Now, don't forget we have shirts, mugs, totes, and a few other goodies in the shop. In addition, I've been in contact with 2 amazing artists regarding a few new products, including a felt pennant and a patch. Well, normally that's not exactly a speedy process, and given the current state of things, it's slowed the process even further. But we're doing our best to get new and exciting products in for you guys to enjoy. And it should never go without saying, thanks to everyone that spends money in the shop. Those sales, combined with Patreon, helps keep the show running and helps keep things relatively ad-free. Alright, here's a call I never expected to receive on a special episode like this. But here we are. this is a submission by Dutch.
Hi, Derek. This is Dutch. This is for your military episode, stories from the military you're doing. I was in the United States Marine Corps as an 0331 infantry machine gunner for about 10 and a half years. And back in 2011, this was after we came back from Afghanistan. So, I mean, our senses were still pretty heightened and still pretty sure of what we saw. So, pretty sure I know what I saw, unless, I was mistaken. It was summer of 2011. We went out on a week-long field op to a place on Pendleton called Red Beach. I was up in the turret for the whole time being. Same driver, we get a pretty good rapport with each other and get to know each other pretty well. So after the week-long field op, we get to bed at about pretty late at night, about midnight, and early morning wake up, and, we're all excited and hop in the trucks, and it's our turn to depart. It's pretty sunny at about probably, I'd say, 0607. So we're coming back, traveling north, and something pops out on the right side of the road out of the bushes, and it walks out on its hind legs. It appeared with its front legs kind of curled in, walking somewhat upright. And the animal had black leathery skin with kind of patchy hair or fur, and when it got out to the middle of the road, it kind of looked around, and when it spotted us, it turned to run off, and you could see kind of a black hump on its upper body behind the shoulder blades running down the back. So after it saw us, it ran off on all fours, sprinting away into the brush. And the best description of this creature, besides the black leathery skin with patchy fur I can give, its hind legs were kind of shaped like a wallabies, I would say. If you've ever seen one of them, but kind of jointed like a dog. So a little doggish. And the front paws were like, I'd say, large raccoon type hands and arms, but it was able to use them when it sprinted away. The face was kind of doggish, kind of animalish. I know coyotes are present in this area, but although it had doggish features, it did not look like anything like a coyote. So after I see this animal, I'm up in the gunner's turret, and I see this animal, and I'm shaking it off. I'm thinking it's probably from too much coffee that morning, or a little excited to get back, when a couple seconds later, it was probably about 150 meters ahead, popped out, maybe a little closer, about 75. Like I said, it happened in 2011. I'm trying to remember as good as possible, but so a couple minutes after it happened, after we already passed the spot where it popped out, ran in the bush, and I didn't see it after that. My driver, who I served in Afghan with, he hits me on the leg and calls my name, hey, Dutch, yeah. So you see that? And I was like, well, it depends. What'd you see? And he described the same thing. And when we got back and we were talking about it, and we're further into detail, because, we're going, it's about 25 miles an hour, and the Humvee's roaring. Can't really hear, but we get back, and the only thing we can think to say is, well, we saw the chupacabra. So go ahead and let me know what you think. I love the podcast, love what you're doing. I'm really excited. Hopefully I can hear this on when I listen next time. And I'm also sending you a picture of, I went back and took a picture where I saw it, as well as I drew a sketch of what I remember it looking like. And my buddy has confirmed that, yeah, that's what we saw. Love what you're doing once again. Have a great one. Thank you.
Mighty kind of you, Dutch. A majority of these chupacabra accounts turn out to be known animals such as coyotes, foxes, and raccoons with a disorder known as mange, a parasite that irritates the skin to the point that the animal damages itself, leaving it hairless and somewhat misfigured. If I'm honest, the description the Dutch gave made it sound like this might have been a raccoon with that condition. The size, dog-like face, hand-like paws, and the raised rear give it away. Then again, there have been creatures matching the chupacabra description reportedly seen in SoCal. So who knows? Maybe something strange really is out there. Thank you again, Dutch, for sharing that submission. Oh, by the way, I searched for about 15 minutes, but I never found Dutch's email. So, Dutch, if you're listening, send it again and I'll be sure to share. Now, I briefly mentioned it a bit ago, but if you're looking for some entertainment, why not consider joining Monsters Among Us Beyond over at Patreon? A $4 monthly pledge gives you access to the entire 30-episode backlog, several videos, and exclusive content. And get this, you can cancel after a month if you want. Visit patreon.com and search for Monsters Among Us. You can't miss it. And great news, a new episode will be dropping by the end of the weekend, and will feature a follow-up by Olivia, the caller from last week that shared a story about a dogman-like creature from my old stomping grounds in Ohio. And I'll give you a hint. It pretty much blows my theory out of the water. So yeah, if you're able, please consider signing up today. Well, you'd think we'd be nearing the end, but that's where you'd be wrong. These military folks really showed up. So that said, our next entry is another creepy one. This time from David in Georgia.
Hey Derek, this is David from Central Georgia. I was calling in response to your need for military stories, and I have a few. The first one, I was in the Army in the 90s, stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. That was my first permanent party. And at the time, the Army would not let soldiers stay in the barracks during holidays such as Christmas and Thanksgiving. NCOs would have to go and pull people out of the barracks and take them to their homes and their families. And that's what my platoon sergeant did. Me and a few others went to his house for Christmas. And he had a 2-story house in a neighborhood that had a finished basement. And it was kind of like a second living room down there. And we had dinner, and, it was getting close to night, and we were all drinking a little bit much. So me and 2 or 3 of the other guys decided we were going to sleep down there in the basement. Now, this NCO, he didn't have any infant children. He had 2 children that were, I believe, ages 9 and 10. And about the middle of the night, as we were laying there sleeping, we started to hear a baby cry. And we got up and we're looking at each other wondering where that's coming from, because you could tell by the sound that it sounded right near us or in the same room. And we were just about to walk up the stairs to the first floor when John, the NCO, opened up the door and he asked if we were okay. And we said, hey, we're hearing something strange down here. And he just looks at us and says, listen, that happens all the time. It's no big deal. Just go back to bed. And that's what we did. We went back to bed, but we didn't go to sleep. Now, my second story, all these years later, I worked civil service. I'm a mechanic on airplanes for the Air Force. And one day, I was working on C-17. I was at my toolbox doing paperwork, and one of my buddies was standing right next to me, talking to me. And as he was talking, I would see a flash out of the corner of my eye, and I looked over there, and I didn't see anything. So I went back to paperwork, and he never stopped talking, really. He's known for that. But it happened again about 15 seconds later. I looked over there, and I couldn't see anything. And, of course, he never stopped talking. Well, it happened a third time, and I looked over there, and he said, what are you looking at? And he turned around to see where I was looking, and as soon as he did, there was another flash of light, and you saw an apparition, really, walk right up underneath the wing. And I'd seen spirits several times in life. He'd never seen one. He didn't disbelieve or believe in them. He just never had the opportunity to think about it or be around them, I guess. But it scared him pretty good, and I almost had to grab him by the hand and drag him underneath that wing so that we could make sure nobody was trying to play a trick on us. Now, this was in August, and the area that we saw this apparition at was freezing cold. And as we stood there, you could feel the coldness just slowly dissipate. But those are my stories. Appreciate the show. Enjoy watching you on the TV. Take care, bud.
Thank you, sir. I hate to make wild speculation, but that's never stopped me before. Why should tonight be any different? So what if what David saw wasn't a spirit, as he suggested, but rather something more akin to Rob's story about the men being dragged into the jungle? Another glimmer man. I'm not grabbing at straws, just simply offering another, perhaps more plausible, possibility. Could someone on base have had access to some sort of technology that then malfunctioned when it was near David and his buddy, allowing them to briefly see the figure beneath? And we certainly heard these stories before. I hearken back to Justin and Harley's story from Idaho from, I believe, season 6. So it's at least something worth thinking about. And as for that first story, that kind of reminds me of one of my favorite memes. There's nothing more soothing than the laughter of a baby filling your home. Unless, that is, you don't have a baby. Thanks again, David, for sharing your tales. If you would, please allow me to remind you to check us out on social media. We have awesome communities at Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter. In fact, at 9 p.m. Eastern, each and every Sunday, you can live tweet the latest episode of Paranormal Caught on Camera with me. We go a little more in depth, answer some questions, crack some jokes, that kind of thing. So join me, Brian Cano, and Aaron Sagers by searching #MyParanormal. A huge thank you to John, Josh, Sarah, Tony, Warren, and the Crypto Den Mom herself for all their hard work and dedication. Alright, things are about to get even more weird. To kick this scary stretch off, the following submitter's name and location are classified.
Hey Derek, so this is a submission for your military stories section, and I thought my experience was pretty suitable for this. I also noticed that you had a few stories on shadow people, and so that story I'm about to tell you is tied directly to that. So initially I was never a big believer in these so-called stories about shadow people, or just shadow people in general, and I'm going to tell you the one that I had, as brief as it was probably the most terrifying and chilling moment of my life. So first and foremost, I'm in the Marine Corps, and we often do a lot of amphibious operations and deployments and stuff like that, where we're going to be attached to Navy ships to get us to where we need to go. So in my story, the year was 2015, and I was on my first deployment. I was attached to the USS Kearsarge, a little bit smaller than a aircraft carrier, but it still has air and sea operation capabilities and stuff like that. It's also full of sailors and Marines at the time of this deployment, and so this is my second year in the military as well. And then operations began against the Islamic State when they were at their peak, so naturally I was pretty happy to do my part in support of Operation Inherent Resolve. So if you've ever been on a naval ship or have ever served on a naval ship, when it's time for taps, time for lights out. Typically that means all of the lights on the ship during nighttime get turned off, and these red lights come on so it can help you navigate around the ship. So this is also a pretty ominous thing because you have these red lights and you're walking through the hallways alone at night and you hear the clanging of metal. So it's kind of generally, it puts you on edge a little bit. Where we have our sleeping spaces, it's called berthings as well. They're all stacked on top of each other, these racks, and you'll have aisles where they separate people. Typically there's about 24 people to an aisle. Each rack is adjacent to the other, so there's 12 racks on each side, depending on how big of an aisle you have. Moving on, I was having, a late night at work, and I was ready to get some sleep. So I walked into, the dark living space. All the lights are off, everybody's sleeping, and stuff like that. It's pretty funky. Has a smell of dirty socks almost all the time, and there's all the other Marines were sleeping there before my arrival. So this was a little bit strange because there was always some foot traffic even late at night. So I wondered why it was like this. Why was it so quiet? Why was it so devoid of anybody there? Pretty much the room was so quiet you can pretty much hear a pin drop in the distance if it did happen that way. So I got to the entrance of my aisle, and I walked a few feet forward to get to the top rack where I slept at. But for some reason, I was stopped dead in my tracks, and I couldn't explain it. But I had this overwhelming sense of dread, and I just felt like I couldn't move. Even to this day, I still don't understand why, but for some reason, I just couldn't move. So my eyes still worked. I could still see what was in front of me. And, I was looking at the red light in front of me because we had one at the very end of the aisle. And for some reason, this light just grew dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. And I saw this like really deep darkness filling the aisle. And I'd never experienced like a darkness like this with so much dread, but something forced me to look up, and in front of me there was this horrendous like sight of almost an 8-foot figure, like a shadowy figure standing in front of me, you know, and I made it face to face, and it was looking almost directly at me, and it was all hunched over, and it was just horrible. Like I couldn't explain it any other way. I guess in hindsight, probably the shadowy head of what I thought I saw of its face was probably about 10 or 12 inches away from mine. And, you know, I sat there for at least like 10 seconds looking up at this thing, but slowly but surely the shadowy figure pretty much dissipated. And, you know, the red light at the end of the hallway, at the end of the aisleway, whatever you want to call it, began to, you know, glow back and come back to normal. And, you know, I felt like I could move again, freely move again. So I sat there for a moment, and I was just like, what the hell happened? I sat there for probably 10 minutes or so, just kind of pondering at this experience of mine. But, you know, I'm still tired. I still got to get sleep. I undressed. I crawled into my rack at the very top, and we sat there for a few minutes before I went to sleep. So, you know, a few days went by, and the experience was still pretty fresh in my mind, and everything in me wanted to tell somebody, but I didn't want them to think I was crazy or anything like that. You know, so a few days went by, and I happened to hear this distant conversation of a fellow Marine of mine who slept in another aisle or whatever. But his conversation was eerily similar to my experience. I walked up to him, and, you know, I asked, hey, what happened? And, you know, I started telling him of my experiences and basically traded back and forth. And he looked surprised, as if he thought he was the only one. And, you know, we went through almost every detail, and everything about the story of mine and his, it matched up. You know, the lack of movement, the dread, the figure, especially the figure, and the fact that it just disappeared at the end of the experience. You know, the crazy part of this all was only 2 days later did another person in the living space also experience it. Same details and everything. And he came up to us after, you know, he heard that we experienced something similar. An additional strange thing is that nobody's experienced it twice. You know, it's only been once with the same details and everything like that. So my curiosity peaked at this point. I naturally did some digging on the internet, which was a really slow process. The internet on the ship is super slow, but I eventually found out that this is the 5th ship to be named the Kearsarge. Every ship prior to this one had some sort of accident where sailors died in horrible ways, which makes me wonder if the name of the ship is just some crazy bad luck thing, and all of these shadow figures and shadow people, particularly this one maybe, were of sailors, you know, who were attached to the name or something like that. Whatever it may be, there's just shadowy figures roaming around these living spaces, possibly throughout the ship when it's night and you're most vulnerable, so to speak. You might be going through some sort of sadness or whatever, and maybe that's what it preys on. Maybe it's looking for the most susceptible victim to take over or to influence or to do something. So that's my story. Thank you. Hope you got something out of this and that somebody can explain it to me further. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, caller. I don't know a lot, but I do know the only way to make a Shadow Man phenomenon more terrifying is to confine it to a ship full of people. Thanks again for sharing that one. Okay, one last announcement before I unleash these last few calls on you. This coming Friday, that's today for most of you, Friday the 15th, if you will, I'll again be attempting the UFO watch. It doesn't really get dark until about 8:30 p.m., our local time, so my apologies to those of you back east. I have been working on a few gadgets to help search the stars, so to speak. So come swing by, say hello. 8:30 p.m., Friday the 15th, on Facebook and hopefully Instagram. Well, there's one element to each of these stories tonight that we've shared, and that is bravery. The bravery shown by these courageous service members. It is a similar, albeit much different type of bravery you'll need for these last two stories. To kick us off, we hear about a rather famous UFO encounter. The following is Henry's submission, from the port town of San Diego.
Hello, Derek. My name is Henry. I'm from San Diego, California. This is for your military special that you were calling out for. Actually, this is a story I've been intending to tell you for a long time. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, but I think now is a perfect time to tell this story. This is a story you may be familiar with, but I don't think you've ever heard it from this angle, or this is a different angle if you want to put it that way. So it's kind of a long story, so I'll just get right into it. In 2004, I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I was part of a Marine Fighter Attack Unit. I won't give any unit numbers or give any names, just to keep people's privacy intact. Like I said, in 2004, I went on a training detachment on the USS Nimitz. Around that time, what a fighter attack squadron will do, along with the Navy, of course, is we go out to sea about